hiding all kinds of insecurities and worries and feelings of inadequacy and, hundreds of things.
Everyone thought Hayley Mills grew up living every girl's dream of fame and love. But behind the cameras, the very people who promised to protect her were quietly destroying her. Now, at 79, the Disney legend is naming the 5 actors who made her life a silent war. Who exactly were these villains hiding in plain sight? It's easy to talk about what went wrong, but first we have to understand that every story has a beginning, and Hayley Mills started far from the chaos that would later follow. So who was she before the spotlight began to burn? Who is Hayley Mills? Before the world ever saw her on a movie screen, Hayley Mills was already surrounded by the sound of applause. Born on April 18, 1946, into a family where fame was part of everyday life, her father, Sir John Mills, was one of Britain's most respected actors, and her mother, Mary Hayley Bell, was a talented writer. For most children, stage lights were a dream, but for Hayley, they were simply part of her home. Yet no one could have predicted how quickly that home would turn into a spotlight that followed her everywhere. In 1959, at just 12 years old, she found herself in front of the camera, starring alongside her father in Tiger Bay. Her natural charm caught the attention of audiences instantly. Hollywood noticed. Among those watching was Walt Disney himself. He saw something real and magnetic in her. Within months, she was offered a 6-picture contract with Disney, a deal that was almost unheard of for someone her age. That same year, her life took off in ways some adults could never imagine, and most children couldn't survive. She didn't just rise to fame, she was swept into it. In 1960, her role in Pollyanna turned her into an international sensation. The film earned her a special Juvenile Academy Award, the last of its kind ever given. From there, her rise was unstoppable. Her voice, her expressions, her optimism, everything about her seemed to radiate light. She was Disney's perfect picture of innocence. But in Hollywood, perfection always comes with a price. As the world celebrated her success, Hayley's life was being shaped by invisible rules. Disney's clean-cut image controlled every move she made. Roles that could have challenged her as an actress were taken away because they didn't fit the studio's idea of who she should be. She wasn't allowed to grow up, not even on screen. What looked like a dream career slowly began to feel like confinement. And for a teenager who longed to explore real emotions and complexity, that kind of cage can be devastating. As the years went on, the pressure to stay perfect became unbearable. She had to remain the same girl the world adored, even as she grew into a woman with her own thoughts and fears. The weight of that expectation crept into her mind, and soon into her body. In her memoir, Forever Young, she spoke honestly about her struggle with bulimia and how she felt trapped in a cycle of control and image. Every compliment felt like a reminder of who she wasn't allowed to become. Still, Hayley Mills never lashed out publicly. She protected the people around her, even those who had caused her pain. My memories involve other people. I didn't want to invade people's privacy, but I wanted to tell the truth, she once said, and she lived by it. For a long time, she kept her silence, guarding old memories like fragile glass. Yet, silence can only last so long. Time has a way of loosening even the strongest self-control, and as the years passed, the truth began to surface. But the real story wasn't in the fan magazines or studio press releases. The real story represented something like a paternal control disguised as protection. The truth is, fame didn't just shape Hayley Mills, it also shaped how people treated her. Behind these smiles and polished headlines, there were real people pulling strings, testing loyalties, and sometimes crossing lines that left scars she carried for decades. As Hayley navigated the highs of early stardom, she encountered all kinds of personalities, from mentors who believed in her to co-stars who challenged her, and others who sort of made her uncomfortable. Hollywood wasn't just about scripts and sets, it was about power. And when that power collided with innocence, the results were often messy. Some of those encounters still linger in her memory, not because of the fame they brought, but because of the pain they caused. These weren't tabloid feuds or petty disagreements. They were moments that revealed the cost of growing up too fast in a world built on make-believe. And when Hayley finally opened up, the names she mentioned and the emotions tied to them shocked even her most loyal fans. Coming up at number 5, we have 5. The boss, Walt Disney himself. Anyone who knew Hayley Mills saw that Walt Disney wasn't just a studio head to her. He was a mentor, a father figure, and the keeper of her biggest opportunity. He invited her family to Disneyland, showed her around as though she were royalty, and even gave her a gold charm bracelet to mark the start of their journey together. He was warm, patient, and attentive. To a young actress fresh from England, that kindness felt like security. However, what she didn't realize was that the same man who gave her that charm bracelet also held the key to her freedom. Every role she played, every public appearance she made, was chosen and approved by Disney himself. One of the first heartbreaks came when she was offered the role of Lolita by Stanley Kubrick. The film was controversial, challenging, and nothing like the sweet characters Hayley was known for. This film could have transformed her career, but Disney refused to even consider it. Not long after, director Otto Preminger approached her for Exodus and went so far as to offer a Renoir painting in hopes of persuading Disney to release her for the part. He still said no. Mind you, this decision wasn't about Hayley's ability. It was about preserving the brand. She wasn't just an actress, she was Disney's symbol of purity. Over time, that protection began to feel like control, because Disney's rules extended far beyond her film roles. She couldn't be seen buying cigarettes, drinking, or even behaving in ways that hinted she was growing up. Her public image had to stay eternally cheerful and innocent. The freedom she imagined fame would bring was replaced with a list of silent expectations she couldn't challenge. She smiled for the cameras and waved at fans, but inside she felt the weight of playing a role she hadn't chosen. The irony was weird and not hard to miss. The man who helped her become an international star also made sure she could never outgrow the role that made her famous. And over time, what began as protection started to feel more like control. Her parents weren't in charge anymore. The real power sat with Disney, and every choice she made had to pass through their filter first. Hayley once admitted that being under contract with Walt Disney had a heavy price. It gave her fame and stability, yes, but it also closed off the chance to grow as an actress. "As much as I really appreciated the opportunity it gave me," she said, "quite frankly, it hampered me from getting more different kinds of roles, and eventually it also influenced how I felt about myself." It was a reflection from someone who had lived her entire youth inside a polished bubble she never wanted. Hayley Mills even described that Disney version of herself as hideous, not because she hated who she was, but because she hated how artificial it all felt. She began to wonder if anyone truly knew her beyond the roles she played. As she grew older, the walls around her career tightened. Every new role looked the same. Every line she delivered felt predictable. Hayley later said Disney films had started to feel like conveyor belt jobs. So goody good, you know. This statement felt like exhaustion from being stuck in the same story over and over again. However, when someone else controls your image, do you ever really own your life? Well, by the time she turned 20, Hayley was ready to take back her life. She turned down a new contract with Disney even though the studio wanted to keep her. This decision was her first real step toward freedom. But she would soon realize that freedom came at a price, albeit a very expensive one. That price revealed itself in her finances. Hayley had earned a fortune as a child star, but when British tax authorities came calling, most of it vanished. Around 2 million British pounds, which is roughly $17 million today, was gone. The money that had symbolized her success disappeared before she ever got to enjoy it. It was her first harsh lesson in how little control she really had over her own career. What made it even harder was her complicated relationship with Walt Disney himself. She spoke warmly of him for years, describing his kindness and the faith he had in her. There was a tremendous sweetness to him that was just genuine, she said. She respected him deeply, yet the same man who believed in her talent had also built the cage around it. It wasn't hate she felt. It was a kind of sorrow for what she might have become if she'd had more room to grow. For Hayley, stepping away wasn't an act of rebellion. It was survival. Disney controlled her professionally. But the next man on this list would attempt to control her personally in a relationship so controversial, it made international headlines. 4. Roy Boulting, the director. 33 years her senior. In 1966, while filming The Family Way, 19-year-old Hayley stepped into a world she didn't see coming. Among the cast and crew was Roy Boulting, who was the film's director, a man of great talent, confidence, and experience. At 52, he had already lived a full life. He was married, had children, and was decades ahead of her in every possible way. Their connection began quietly, but it didn't take long before people started to notice the chemistry that flickered between them. When the news broke, it caused a storm. The public, who had grown up watching Hayley as Disney's bright-eyed darling, couldn't believe what they were hearing. Their beloved Pollyanna was now involved with a man old enough to be her father. The press had a field day. Every headline painted her as a naive girl swept up by an older man's charm. For Hayley, it was a sharp shift from the innocent world of childhood fame to the complicated realities of adulthood. Magazines speculated endlessly, wondering whether she had been guided or groomed. Critics whispered about how fast she'd grown up. And through it all, Hayley tried to balance her heart with her ambition. She was searching for independence in a world that still saw her as the girl from The Parent Trap. Roy had helped her move into adult roles, but in doing so, she'd also stepped into a kind of adulthood she wasn't fully prepared for. When Hayley first spoke about her relationship with Roy, she didn't sound conflicted. She said, the fact that he was considerably older was probably part of the attraction. To her, being with someone over 30 years her senior didn't seem strange. She'd spent her childhood around adults on movie sets, so the age gap felt almost familiar. To everyone else, though, it looked like a warning sign waiting to be noticed. Still, in Hayley's mind, Roy offered something she had been missing since childhood. Years later, she explained, he was somebody who could look after me. There was a kind of safe harbor feeling. After growing up under Disney's tight control, where every move was managed and every smile rehearsed, she found comfort in the idea of being cared for instead of directed. Yet, just like in Walt Disney's case, that same comfort hinted at something deeper that would slowly shape her choices more than she realized. While Hayley tried to see their bond as genuine, the world around her was drawing different conclusions. The British tabloids couldn't resist the story. They called Roy her Svengali, a man using his experience to mold a young actress in his image. Reporters questioned whether Hayley was following her heart or simply following his lead. And while she brushed it off at the time, the signs of control and isolation were already showing. Her career, which had once been unstoppable, started to lose momentum. The Family Way, Twisted Nerve, and Endless Night, all these movies she made with Roy were meant to showcase her as a grown woman, far from the child star audiences adored. However, critics weren't convinced, and box office numbers reflected that. Slowly, the girl who once symbolized innocence and optimism began to fade from Hollywood's spotlight. When Hayley and Roy got married in 1971, many thought the controversy would tone down, but it didn't. Well, despite the whole controversy, the couple welcomed their son Crispian 2 years later, and for a while, it seemed like she found stability. But by 1975, cracks had formed that no amount of affection could fix. The marriage ended 2 years later, because reports suggested the marriage created an environment where Hayley Mills felt unable to push her career forward independently. In an interview, she recalled by saying, "It wasn't right. It wasn't working. I wasn't able to be true to myself." Also, in another interview, Hayley reflected on how the relationship withheld the freedom she desired. "When I would go and do a movie, or I would go off every night to the theater, I think he felt very insignificant. He felt the age difference in that respect much more than I did. I didn't want to stray or have relationships or anything like that. I wanted the freedom to just be young, and that's what he found threatening." She recognized that Roy became insecure when she pursued her own professional work. This created an emotional pressure, and she felt she was leading his life on his terms. This confession revealed what many had sensed from the start. Hayley Mills also described that life together had been closed off from the world. "We never saw anybody," she once said. "It was a very isolated life." For someone who had spent her youth surrounded by crews, cameras, and applause, the quiet life must have felt like both peace and exile. Finally, the couple finalized their divorce in 1977. But what's hard to ignore is the cost of that relationship on her career trajectory. She did not hate Roy. She said she loved him. But at 79, Hayley can look back and see the imbalance that her younger self could not. She became involved with a famous director who had power, a young actress trying to break away from her child star image. Now, Hollywood has a way of pairing people who were never meant to get along. When Hayley crossed paths with Rosalind Russell, it wasn't all warm smiles and shared stories. It was something else. Whatever the dynamics of their relations, it was definitely one characterized by bad blood. 3. Rosalind Russell. Up to this point, Hayley's charm seemed to win over everyone she worked with. But Rosalind Russell, a co-star, was not so easily impressed. Rosalind Russell was a woman who seemed born to command a room. Born in 1907 in Waterbury, Connecticut, she grew up in a large Irish Catholic family, one of 7 children. From an early age, she wasn't the type to blend into the background. She had wit, confidence, and a sharp sense of who she was. While Hollywood in the 1930s was filled with glamour and submission, Rosalind carved her path with intellect and poise. She trained at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York, before stepping onto Broadway and eventually into film. Her defining moment came when she played the sharp-tongued reporter Hildy Johnson in His Girl Friday, filmed in 1940. This was a role that cemented her as a woman who could hold her own against any man in the room. Over the years, she earned Oscar nominations, 5 Golden Globes, and the respect of audiences who admired her independence. By the mid-1960s, Rosalind had nothing left to prove. She had transitioned from Hollywood's golden era into a respected elder stateswoman of the screen. Her roles carried weight and dignity. Her presence unmistakable. So when she was cast in The Trouble with Angels in 1966, it felt like a natural fit. What no one predicted, however, was how this film would quietly spark one of the most curious behind-the-scenes tensions of her career. The Trouble with Angels was a lighthearted story set in a Catholic boarding school called St. Francis Academy. Rosalind played the stern yet compassionate Mother Superior, the woman responsible for guiding a group of mischievous girls toward discipline and faith. Hayley Mills, fresh from her days as Disney's wholesome prodigy, played Mary Clancy, the school's rebellious troublemaker with a talent for mischief. The film explored youth, authority, and the push and pull between order and rebellion. It was charming, funny, and a perfect setup for unexpected tension. What made the casting so intriguing was how it mirrored life. Rosalind, a symbol of Hollywood's disciplined, structured past, shared the screen with Hayley, the fresh-faced star trying to redefine herself. The script might have been about nuns and pranks, but the energy on set hinted at a generational clash unfolding in real time. As the cameras rolled, rumors began to circulate about friction between the two actresses. It wasn't explosive, but subtle. Rosalind, the ever-professional, reportedly said that Hayley would stick her tongue out at her whenever her back was turned, and that made them not get along during the filming. Was it a harmless prank? Maybe. However, for someone of Rosalind's stature, it felt like a younger woman testing boundaries. To Rosalind, it wasn't funny. It was personal. The tension wasn't loud enough to make headlines, though insiders noticed. To Rosalind, Hayley's behavior seemed disrespectful. To Hayley, it might have been an impulsive way to push back against authority, both in character and in life. After all, she was stepping out of Disney's shadow, trying to prove she wasn't a child anymore. Working alongside someone who embodied order and experience might have felt suffocating. When filming wrapped up, both actresses moved on. The movie was well received, praised for its warmth and humor. Yet those who knew what had happened behind the scenes couldn't help but see a shadow of that real-life tension on screen. It's one thing to take direction from a famous actor. It's another when that actor happens to be your father. What happens when love and legacy start to clash on set? 2. John Mills. When father becomes boss. Working with family can be tricky, but working with your father when he's a national treasure? That's something else entirely. Hayley Mills grew up watching her father, Sir John Mills, light up screens and stages across Britain. He wasn't only famous, he was deeply respected. Knighted by Queen Elizabeth II in 1976, John Mills represented a kind of old-school British dignity that demanded excellence. For Hayley, acting alongside him meant stepping into a shadow cast by greatness. Their collaboration began when Hayley was barely a teenager. Her first film, Tiger Bay, filmed in 1959, paired her directly with her father. At the time, John Mills was already an established actor, known for films like Great Expectations and Ice Cold in Alex. Hayley, on the other hand, was stepping into her very first starring role. The chemistry between them was electric, not because they were father and daughter, but because both carried a natural ability to hold a camera's gaze. Tiger Bay didn't just introduce Hayley to the world. It showed that talent ran deep in the Mills family. Their careers intertwined more than most even realized. They worked together in films like In Search of the Castaways, The Truth About Spring, and The Family Way. In 1966, John even moved behind the camera to direct Hayley in Sky West and Crooked, his only feature film as director. Every take carried not only the expectations of a director, but also the watchful eye of a father who knew her better than anyone else. John was known for his professionalism and his ability to hold a scene and to bring truth without theatrics. Hayley later described him as both loving and demanding, someone who believed real performances required authentic effort. Watching him work was inspiring and intimidating. Still, there were moments when the family bond collided with artistic honesty. Acting is full of vulnerability, and when the person critiquing your performance is also your father, every comment hits closer to the heart. Hayley once reflected that her father never handed out praise casually. To earn his approval was to know you'd truly done something remarkable. That balance between affection and scrutiny shaped much of Hayley's early career. It toughened her, even when it hurt. Their time on Sky West and Crooked was particularly revealing. The film didn't reach the commercial heights of Hayley's earlier Disney hits, yet it stood as one of her most sincere performances. Behind the scenes, father and daughter navigated the delicate act of separating emotion from professionalism. But if you think her real-life dad was the only complicated father figure in Hayley's story, think again. Because what really went on between Hayley Mills and her Parent Trap co-star Brian Keith might change how you see that movie forever. 1. Hayley Mills hated Brian Keith. When Hayley looks back at filming The Parent Trap in 1961 with Brian Keith, she speaks in warm tones. She once said she loved working with Brian Keith, who played the parents, and learned how to behave on the set from them. Keith, who was already a seasoned actor at the time, played Mitch Evers, the father of Hayley's twin characters. This on-screen role naturally lent itself to a mentorship-style relationship behind the scenes, at least as Hayley describes it. Despite that positive framing, online rumors and fan theories occasionally suggest there was tension between them, implying that Hayley harbored resentment toward Keith during or after their collaboration. These theories seem to rest on the assumption that Hayley's childhood stardom was shaped by all kinds of hidden conflicts and that co-stars bore blame. However, there is no credible evidence that Hayley ever publicly said she hated Brian Keith or held a grudge against him. In all known interviews, she frames him as professional, helpful, and solid on set. In fact, several reports describe their working relationship as affectionate and respectful. One profile even quoted Hayley, describing Keith as a second father, someone who had a calm, grounding presence that made her feel safe both on and off the set. Still, the speculation lingers. Maybe it's because The Parent Trap became such a cultural touchstone. When a film feels that real, people want to believe there was real emotion, like love, conflict, or even heartbreak, behind it. Maybe fans assume that kind of chemistry can't exist without sparks flying somewhere. Yet by all accounts, Hayley and Keith's connection was built on trust, humor, and professionalism. If any creative friction ever existed, it was the kind that makes a scene stronger, not the kind that turns co-stars into enemies. Importantly, if Hayley had held real disdain for Keith, we would likely see it in published statements or her memoir. Instead, her commentary remains respectful. She credits Keith for making her feel comfortable and for teaching her how to behave on the set. This clearly suggests admiration, not animosity. In a world quick to invent feuds, this one doesn't hold up under any real light. Their bond was formed through shared respect and the simple rhythm of two people doing what they loved. Even decades later, when fans revisit The Parent Trap, that chemistry still feels genuine. Perhaps the real secret is that behind the smiles and script, there was no drama to uncover. Over the years, Hayley's story became less about the people she clashed with and more about the lessons each encounter left behind. From her father's high expectations to Disney's relentless control and Roy Boulting's possessive influence, she learned how easily admiration can blur into authority and how dangerous it is to lose your own voice in someone else's vision. But instead of letting those experiences harden her, she used them to grow wiser, calmer, and more self-assured. Hollywood can be brutal to women who outgrow their innocent image. Many fade into silent bitterness, but Hayley chose something different. She chose peace. Every person who tried to define her only pushed her closer to defining herself. And in the end, she emerged not as the girl the world remembered, but as the woman she finally wanted to be. So where is Hayley Mills now, and how does she look back on a life lived under the spotlight? Hayley Mills. Today. Time has a subtle way of rewriting stories, and for Hayley Mills, the second act has unfolded on her own terms. After decades under the bright lights of childhood stardom, she's shifted into a rhythm that feels more real and less scripted. While she still acts, her focus has broadened to stage work, family, writing, advocacy, and a sense of self she finally owns. In 2024, she surprised many when she appeared as Dr. Josephine Grant, an FBI profiler in Trap, directed by M. Night Shyamalan. The role wasn't a retreat into nostalgia. It was a statement. She wasn't returning as the Disney star of decades ago. She was returning as Hayley, the seasoned, self-assured woman still capable of capturing attention. After all, the industry she'd grown up in had changed, and so had she. But stepping back into the spotlight felt different this time. It wasn't about chasing fame, it was about rediscovering purpose. That's why the excitement in the media wasn't only about a comeback. It was about watching someone they had grown up with take control of her story again, in a way no one saw coming. Well, away from the cameras, Hayley has embraced the world of family. As a grandmother to 4 grandchildren, she often speaks of them with affection and awe. She describes the joy of being granny without needing to be so perfect. For her, these moments offer a sense of normalcy that eluded her in her early career. In interviews, she reflects on the satisfaction of finally living on her own terms, away from the relentless pressures of youth and public expectation. Her personal life also reflects a journey toward authenticity. Since 1997, she has been in a relationship with Firdaus Bamji, an artist and actor who is 22 years younger than her. Their bond is rooted in shared creative pursuits, rather than fame or image. She said they first met while touring in a production of The King and I. The age difference never defined them. Instead, it was a mutual appreciation for theater, storytelling, and personal growth that held them together. Also, writing and reflection have become essential parts of Hayley's life. In her memoir, Forever Young, a Memoir, she opened up about the psychological pressures of growing up under constant scrutiny, the loss of a private self, and the long path toward reclaiming autonomy. Today, she uses her voice to advocate for understanding the impact of child stardom, a topic that remained largely unspoken when she was younger. Her perspective resonates because it comes from experience, not conjecture. What strikes many observers is how she phrases her past. Hayley hasn't framed her story in bitterness or resentment. She's clear about what bothered her, the control, the judgment, and the impossible standards she was expected to meet. She didn't outrightly hate the people she worked with. She hated what they represented. It isn't the actors themselves she puts at fault, but the pressures and restrictions of the system around them. Even at nearly 80, Hayley remains active. She chooses roles that feel meaningful, writes when she feels compelled, and loves without hesitation. In a world that once defined her by youth and image, she now defines herself by presence and purpose. But then, were these actors truly the villains in her story? Or were they just reflections of the darker side of Hollywood she was never allowed to expose? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. To enjoy more content like this, tap on the next video on your screen.